I am Nathan. I am 28 years old. 2 years ago, I collapsed in front of thousands of people at my master's graduation, and my own parents did not even bother to show up. While I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to heart monitors and 4 bags, fighting to keep my eyes open, my parents were throwing a backyard barbecue. They did not just ignore my medical emergency. My younger brother tagged me in a photo of them laughing around the grill with the caption, "Family day without the drama." They mocked me publicly to all our relatives and friends while my heart was literally giving out. But there was one thing they did not know. They thought they were dealing with the same subservient, cash cow son they had bled dry for years. They had no idea I was sitting on a massive tech startup buyout, backed by the best lawyer in Boston, and I held the power to freeze every single asset they mistakenly thought they could steal from me. And now they are begging on my doorstep. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little world and built my own, please hit that like button if you believe in justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments down below. Now, let us go back to where the nightmare finally cracked open and the truth spilled out. The emergency room smelled like industrial bleach, stale coffee, and the sharp, undeniable metallic tang of human fear. I remember the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights burning through my eyelids long before my brain could process how to command my muscles to open them. The steady, mechanical beep of the heart monitor was the absolute only sound anchoring me to reality. Every single time I tried to draw a breath, my chest felt like someone had parked a heavy commercial truck directly over my ribs. I tried to shift my weight on the thin mattress, just to sit up and assess the damage, but a sharp, radiating pain shot down my left arm, instantly forcing me back against the stiff, unforgiving hospital pillow. I blinked against the glaring light, my vision swimming with dark spots. The ceiling tiles slowly came into focus. I was not on the graduation stage anymore. The roar of the proud crowd, the booming voice of the university dean, the blinding, beautiful sunlight of a Boston afternoon. It was all completely gone, replaced by the sterile purgatory of Trauma Bay No. 4. Dr. Harrison walked into the room. He was an older man, late 50s, with deep, permanent lines etched around his eyes that told you he had seen plenty of unspeakable tragedy in his long career. He held a metal clipboard against his chest and looked down at me with a mixture of professional medical concern and a deeply personal, heavy pity. I knew Dr. Harrison quite well. I worked in this very hospital as an administrative coordinator. Seeing him stand over me as a fragile patient, rather than a competent colleague handing him patient files, was entirely surreal and deeply humiliating. "Nathan," Dr. Harrison said, his voice low, measured, and incredibly steady, "you had a severe syncope episode right on the grass. Extreme exhaustion, severe clinical dehydration, and stress-induced cardiac strain. Your blood pressure completely bottomed out. Your body basically pulled the emergency brake because you refused to stop driving it into the ground. You are incredibly lucky you collapsed in a crowd with trained paramedics on standby, and not alone in your apartment where no one would have found you for days." I stared at the ceiling tiles. I started counting the little perforated dots on the acoustic panels just to ground my spiraling mind. I did not feel lucky in the slightest. I felt entirely hollowed out. I felt like a ghost haunting my own failing body. "Did my parents arrive?" I asked. My voice did not even sound like my own. It sounded like dry autumn leaves scraping across rough concrete. Dr. Harrison stopped writing on his medical chart. He looked at the linoleum floor for a brief, heavy second before meeting my eyes again. That specific hesitation, the dropping of the professional gaze, told me absolutely everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth to deliver the blow. "We called the emergency contact numbers listed in your employee human resources file several times," he explained, his tone softening in a way that made my stomach churn. "We left detailed voicemails explaining that you were in the emergency room, that you had collapsed at the commencement ceremony, and that you were initially unresponsive upon arrival." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable bearing this kind of emotional news. "No one has come, Nathan. They did not answer a single call and they have not called back. We have been trying for 3 hours. The silence in that trauma room became a physical, crushing weight pressing down on my chest, vastly heavier than the cardiac strain I was recovering from. It was not a surprising silence. It was a brutal, confirming one. This was my graduation day. The day I earned my master's degree while working a grueling full-time job. The day I nearly worked myself into an early grave just to prove I was worthy of their basic attention. And they simply did not care. They could not even be bothered to pick up the telephone to see if their eldest son was dead or alive. When Dr. Harrison finally left to check on a trauma patient down the hall, firmly instructing me to rest and keep my heart rate down, I slowly reached for my personal phone resting on the rolling bedside table. My fingers trembled so violently I dropped the device twice on the thin cotton blanket before I could even swipe up to unlock the home screen. I expected to see a missed call. Maybe a frantic text message saying they were stuck in terrible highway traffic, or that they had sudden car trouble. My exhausted brain was still desperately trying to manufacture logical excuses for their absence. Instead, a push notification popped up on the lock screen. It was an Instagram tag from my younger brother, Julian. I tapped the notification with a numb finger. The screen illuminated, loading a high-definition, perfectly filtered photo of my entire family. My father, Gregory, was holding a pair of stainless steel tongs by the expensive, imported grill I had bought them last Christmas using a significant portion of my salary. My mother, Brenda, was holding a crystal glass of expensive white wine, throwing her head back in genuine, unbothered laughter. And Julian, standing right in the absolute center of the frame, was wearing a brand new designer shirt that I knew for a fact he could not afford, smiling his arrogant, deeply entitled smile. The caption was right there in bold, mocking letters for everyone in our hometown to see. Family Day without the drama. I did not cry. I did not throw the phone against the sterile white wall. I just stared at the glowing pixels until they blurred together into a sickening collage of betrayal. The drama Julian was publicly referring to was me. Me, asking them to finally show up for one singularly important milestone in my entire life. Me asking them to be actual parents for just one single afternoon in Boston. To them, my graduation, my entire existence, my severe medical emergency, was just an inconvenient disruption to their perfect, sunny weekend. I swiped out of the social media app. That is exactly when I saw the bright red notification bubble hovering over my phone icon. 75 missed calls. All from my father, my mother, and Julian. But as I looked closely at the timestamps, a cold, sickening realization washed over my entire body. They were not from the time I collapsed. They did not happen when the hospital staff was desperately trying to reach them to authorize emergency care. The calls started rolling in exactly 2 hours after Julian posted that barbecue photo. I opened my text messages. A massive wall of green texts from my father glared back at me, each one more demanding and aggressive than the last. Where are you? Pick up the phone right now. This is an emergency. We need you. Answer immediately. Julian is in trouble. You need to call the bank today. Do not ignore me, Nathan. Your brother's future is on the line. Call us back now. They did not know I was in the hospital, and even if they had bothered to check their voicemails from Dr. Harrison, they clearly did not care about my failing heart. The only reason my phone was blowing up, vibrating off the bedside table, was that Julian had created another massive financial disaster, and they needed their reliable ATM, their designated family problem solver, to fix it immediately. My chest tightened again, but this time it was not a medical issue. It was pure, unfiltered, crystalline clarity. I locked the phone, placed it face down on the cold metal table, and closed my eyes. The old Nathan would have called back in an absolute panic. The old Nathan would have ignored the 4-needle buried deep in his vein, signed himself out against medical advice, and figured out a way to wire them money or sign whatever legal documents they needed to save Julian from his own consequences. But as I lay there listening to my own steady heartbeat on the hospital monitor, I realized the old Nathan had died on that graduation stage. I thought the worst was over. I thought the deep, agonizing pain of them abandoning me on my biggest day was the absolute bottom of the barrel. I was so incredibly wrong. The storm was just gathering its strength. Growing up in our quiet, perfectly manicured neighborhood in suburban Pennsylvania, you would honestly think we were the absolute perfect American family. We had the large wraparound porch, the perfectly edged green lawn maintained by strict HOA standards, and the massive Thanksgiving dinners that looked like they belonged on the cover of a glossy lifestyle magazine. But inside those freshly painted walls, the house was strictly and ruthlessly divided into two very distinct worlds. The world that revolved entirely around Julian's happiness, and the world where I was expected to quietly manage the endless fallout. Julian was the ultimate golden child. He was born 3 years after me, premature and somewhat sickly for the first few months of his life. My mother, Brenda, built an impenetrable, suffocating fortress of anxiety and indulgence around him that never faded away, even long after he grew into a perfectly healthy, athletic, and robust teenager. She treated him like he was made of spun glass that would shatter at the slightest breeze. My father, Gregory, encouraged this dynamic in his own rigid way. He was a strict, emotionally cold man who measured a person's absolute worth entirely by their physical utility and financial contribution to the household. I learned my exact utility very early on in life. I vividly remember Julian's 10th birthday party. My parents rented out a massive local entertainment arcade, bought a huge 3-tier custom fondant cake, and invited over 20 of his loud, messy friends. They spent thousands of dollars without batting an eye. They even hired a professional photographer to document the perfect day. The very next day was my 13th birthday. I woke up expecting maybe a small wrapped gift, a generic card, or at least a special pancake breakfast. Instead, my father walked into my bedroom at exactly 7 a.m., handed me a heavy, industrial black trash bag, and bluntly told me to go clean up the wrappers, crushed soda cups, and half-eaten pizza slices left over from Julian's massive after-party in our backyard. "You are the older brother, Nathan," my father said, standing on the back porch with his morning coffee, watching me pick up sticky garbage on my actual birthday. "Men do not complain. Men protect the family infrastructure. You are the strong one. Be a point of leverage, not a useless burden. Julian is highly sensitive. You are built to handle the heavy lifting." I took the trash bag in silence and spent my entire birthday morning scrubbing sticky soda residue off the patio furniture. That specific day became the permanent blueprint for the rest of my life. When it came time for college, the glaring disparity became purely financial. Julian received the massive college fund that our late grandparents had originally set up to be split equally between both of us. My parents completely drained my half of the inheritance account to buy Julian a brand new car and pay for his expensive out-of-state tuition, which he predictably ended up blowing in exactly 3 semesters before dropping out entirely to find himself. I, on the other hand, worked brutal, soul-crushing night shifts at a local 24-hour diner to pay for my own community college classes before finally transferring to a rigorous university program in Boston. Whenever I dared to bring up the blatant unfairness, whenever I asked why my meager salary was always expected to cover Julian's endless mistakes, my mother would instantly unleash her ultimate weapon, weaponized guilt. She would cry hysterically, clutch her chest as if having a cardiac event, and talk endlessly about how fragile and misunderstood Julian was. She would manipulate the entire narrative so flawlessly that by the end of the screaming argument, I was actually apologizing for being a selfish, ungrateful son. I became deeply and psychologically conditioned to believe that my personal needs were entirely secondary. If I was not providing a tangible financial solution, I was failing as a son. That toxic, deeply ingrained conditioning followed me all the way to Boston. I moved to the busy city to pursue a demanding master's degree in health administration while working a grueling, full-time administrative job at a large local hospital. I was fiercely determined to build a successful life of my own. I thought the physical distance of several states would finally sever the heavy strings they had firmly attached to my back. But toxic families do not let go of their designated safety nets that easily. The demanding phone calls started a few months into my very first semester. It was never a simple, loving, "How are you doing, son?" It was always an immediate crisis, a broken water heater that needed replacing, a missed mortgage payment because my father's hours at the firm were supposedly cut back, a massive car repair bill for Julian. And because I had that deeply ingrained hero complex they installed in my brain since childhood, I always paid. I always hit the transfer button. The major turning point, the exact moment the psychological foundation really started to violently crack, happened 6 months before my graduation ceremony. I had just finished a brutal, exhausting 12-hour shift at the hospital and was walking back to my tiny, overpriced, freezing studio apartment. My phone rang loudly in the quiet street. It was Aunt Martha. She was my mother's older sister, a bitter woman who thrived on neighborhood gossip, aggressive HOA meetings, and forcefully inserting herself into everyone's personal tragedy. "Nathan, you need to step up immediately," Aunt Martha said the absolute second I answered. No hello, no polite greeting, just immediate, heavy, suffocating demands. "Your mother is very sick. She needs emergency gallbladder surgery by the end of the week, and their health insurance is pushing back on the coverage. They are drowning in medical bills. You have that fancy hospital salary now, do you not? You need to help your family before something terrible happens, and you regret it for the rest of your life." Pure panic seized my chest. My mother was sick. Despite absolutely everything they had done, she was still my mother. I immediately asked to speak to her, but Aunt Martha claimed she was resting in bed, heavily medicated on painkillers, and far too weak to talk on the phone. My father texted me exactly an hour later with a bank routing number and a highly specific dollar amount. $3,000. I did not have $3,000 just sitting around in a savings account. I was literally living on cheap ramen noodles and instant coffee, funneling every single spare cent into my steep university tuition and sky-high city rent. But the deep childhood programming took over my rational brain. I went online and took out a high-interest personal loan from a predatory lender. I signed the digital paperwork, watched the funds hit my checking account, and immediately wired the entire amount to my father. I spent the next 2 weeks working double shifts at the hospital, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, terrified that my mother was in a cold hospital bed suffering. Then came the Friday night that shattered the illusion completely into a million pieces. I was on my phone, mindlessly scrolling through social media while waiting for a delayed city bus in the freezing, relentless Boston rain. Julian's profile popped up on my main feed. He had a public account, always desperate for external validation and likes. The uploaded photo showed him standing on a beautiful, sun-drenched beach in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. He was holding a premium, expensive cocktail, wearing designer sunglasses. Standing right next to him, looking perfectly healthy, deeply tanned, and absolutely radiant, was my mother. The caption read, "Last-minute getaway, treating the queen to paradise. #vacation mode." I completely stopped breathing. The freezing rain soaked entirely through my thin winter coat, but I did not feel the cold at all. I zoomed in on the date stamp. It was posted that exact morning. I checked the comment section. Aunt Martha had commented, "Have a huge margarita for me. You two deserve it." There was no emergency surgery. There was no insurance dispute. They had orchestrated a massive, elaborate, sickening lie, specifically using Aunt Martha to bypass my usual logical defenses, just to extract $3,000 from me so Julian and my mother could go on a luxury tropical vacation. I stood there in the pouring rain, holding the phone, feeling something fundamental and permanent snap inside my chest. It was not just anger. It was a deep, dark, overwhelming humiliation. I had taken out a loan with a predatory interest rate that would take me a year to pay off. I was sacrificing my own physical health, eating absolute scraps, and shivering at a bus stop, all to directly fund their resort vacation. I called my father immediately. He picked up on the fourth ring, sounding entirely unbothered. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably from the adrenaline. "I just saw Julian's post on Instagram. Mom is in Cabo." There was a brief, tense pause on the line. I heard the television blaring a loud sports game in the background. My father did not sound embarrassed. He sounded incredibly annoyed that I was bothering him during his evening. "Nathan, do not start with the complaining," he said sharply. "Your mother has been highly stressed lately. She needed a break from the house. Julian found a really good deal online. It is not a big deal. Stop acting like the world is ending. Not a big deal? I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned pure white. You told me she needed surgery. I took out a loan, Dad. I am paying 20% interest on the money you used to send them to the beach to drink cocktails. Stop being so incredibly dramatic, he snapped, his voice turning cold and authoritative. You are young. You can work it off. We raised you, put a roof over your head, paid for your food for 18 years, and now you want to count pennies with your own mother? Be a man, Nathan. Do not call here disrespecting us over a little trip. He hung up, just like that. A sharp click, then a dial tone. I stood under the broken bus shelter and stared at the dark, wet street. A sharp, piercing pain flared deep behind my ribs. It was the very first physical warning sign my body gave me. A direct, undeniable protest against the massive stress I was absorbing. I completely ignored it. I shoved the phone deep in my pocket and walked all the way home in the freezing rain. I decided that very night I would never, ever give them another dime. I would focus entirely on my master's degree and my growing career. But I had absolutely no idea that cutting off their easy cash flow would force them to find a much more dangerous, highly illegal way to access my life. I thought setting a firm boundary would protect me. I did not realize it would put a massive, glowing target directly on my back. Life in the Boston hospital was an absolute, unforgiving battlefield. I was an administrative coordinator for the emergency department, a high-stress job that required me to manage intense patient flow, deal with highly aggressive insurance companies, and handle the endless logistical nightmares of a constantly overflowing ER. Dr. Victor, one of the senior attending physicians on the floor, made it his absolute personal mission to make my daily life miserable. He was an arrogant, deeply condescending man who viewed administrative staff as his personal, expendable servants. He routinely dumped his own heavy paperwork on my desk, dangling the shiny promise of a future promotion in front of me like a carrot on a stick to keep me working past my scheduled hours. Get these complex patient charts sorted and filed by morning, Nathan, Victor would say, dropping a massive, heavy stack of folders right next to my keyboard at 7 p.m. when I was supposed to be clocking out to go study. If you actually want that promotion to department director, you need to show some real initiative. I expect absolute perfection. Do not disappoint me. I was running on absolute toxic fumes. Between the grueling hospital shifts, writing my comprehensive master's thesis, and making the crushing monthly payments on the loan I took out for my family's fake surgery, I was barely sleeping 3 hours a night. My hands started to shake violently when I typed on the keyboard. I lived off chalky antacids and bitter black coffee. Clara, a veteran triage nurse and my only real, genuine friend in the department, saw right through my crumbling, exhausted facade. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman who had fought her own brutal custody battle and survived a nasty divorce years ago. That painful experience gave her a razor-sharp, infallible radar for toxic relationships and emotional manipulation. One evening, she physically pulled a thick stack of discharge papers right out of my shaking hands. Nathan, look at yourself in a mirror right now, Clara demanded, her voice firm but laced with deep, genuine worry. You are ghostly white. You have lost at least 15 pounds in 2 months. Victor is completely using you, and whoever is draining your bank account back home is literally killing you. You need to stop this madness. I can handle it, Clara, I muttered weakly, aggressively rubbing my burning, bloodshot eyes. I just need to get through graduation. Once I have the master's degree, I can get a better salary. I can finally breathe. You are not going to make it to graduation if your heart gives out first, she warned, pointing a finger at my chest. You are carrying too much. Far too much. She was entirely right, but I was trapped in a desperate survival loop. And just when I firmly thought I had completely walled off my family and secured my boundaries, the real betrayal hit me from a massive, devastating blind spot. 2 months exactly before graduation, a formal certified letter arrived at the hospital's administrative office, addressed directly to me. I opened it carefully during my short lunch break. It was a final, aggressive notice from a highly predatory debt collection agency. The massive debt was not mine. It was a $20,000 gambling debt racked up at a shady offshore online casino. The name on the primary account was Julian, but my full legal name, my highly sensitive social security number, and my current Boston workplace were explicitly listed as the primary emergency guarantor. I felt all the blood completely drain from my face, leaving my skin icy cold. Julian had illegally used my identity to secure a massive line of credit to feed his gambling addiction. The aggressive collection agency had tracked down my specific employment location and was actively threatening to garnish my hospital salary and initiate a devastating lawsuit that would ruin my career. I desperately needed to know exactly how they got my current employment details and financial information. I had kept my life in Boston completely and totally isolated from my family, or so I falsely thought. I immediately called Derek. Derek was my oldest childhood friend from back in Pennsylvania. We grew up on the exact same street, played on the same little league baseball team. When I moved to Boston, Derek was the only single person from my past I stayed in close touch with. I trusted him implicitly. Over the past year, I had confided deeply in Derek about my struggles, but much more importantly, I had confided in him about my one massive, life-changing secret. Alongside my demanding hospital job and my degree, I had spent the last 2 years quietly developing a highly complex back-end software patch for hospital triage systems. It was a late-night side project born out of pure frustration with the incredibly slow, outdated software we used in the ER. I built it, successfully patented it, and a major healthcare tech firm had quietly purchased the exclusive rights to it for a life-changing amount of money. I was setting up an LLC, working extensively with corporate lawyers, and quietly funneling the massive buyout money into a highly secure trust managed by Caldwell Financial. I was preparing to heavily invest in commercial real estate. I was secretly wealthy, but I lived like I was completely broke because the buyout was under a strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreement until the official public rollout. I only told Derek because I desperately needed someone to celebrate with. I explicitly, clearly told him my family could never, ever know about the money or the tech buyout. When Derek answered the phone, he sounded overly cheerful, almost entirely oblivious. "Hey man, how is the big city treating the future tech millionaire?" "Derek?" I said, my voice dropping to an ice-cold whisper. "How did a debt collection agency find my specific hospital department to serve a legal debt notice for Julian?" Total silence. The kind of thick, incredibly guilty silence that makes the hairs on your arms stand straight up. I have no idea, man," Derek stammered, his confident tone vanishing instantly. "Why would you ask me?" "Because you are the absolutely only person back home who knows the exact name of the hospital and specific department I work in. You are the only one who knows my salary bracket and the details of my side project." I paced the empty break room rapidly, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "What exactly did you tell my father?" "Listen, Nathan, do not get mad," Derek said, his voice dropping into a pathetic, defensive whine. "Your dad ran into me at Walmart last month by the registers. He was asking all about you. He seemed really worried. He was talking about how you were ignoring their calls, how Julian was in a really tight spot with some bad people. I just told him you were doing great. I told him you were making big moves, that you had that tech money coming in soon. I was bragging about you, man. I told him you had a fancy lawyer setting up real estate deals. I swear I did not give him your social security number." My vision tunneled until all I could see was the wall in front of me. Derek, the guy I trusted like a literal brother, had enthusiastically handed my greedy father the absolute, detailed map to my hidden life. My father did not need Derek to give him my social security number. He already had that neatly filed away from my old college tax returns. But Derek gave him the ultimate motivation. Derek enthusiastically told a greedy, deeply manipulative man that his estranged, useful son was secretly sitting on a massive gold mine. "You told him about the tech buyout?" I whispered, the intense rage turning ice-cold in my veins. "I thought he would be proud of you." Derek deflected, trying to play the victim. "Come on, Nathan. You are being completely paranoid. They are your family. If you have that kind of money sitting around, maybe you should just help Julian out. It is just a gambling debt. Share the wealth, right? I ended the call without another single word. I immediately blocked Derek's number. I blocked his social media profiles. I systematically and permanently cut him out of my life in exactly 60 seconds. But the devastating damage was already done. Derek had painted a massive, glowing target directly on my back. My parents now firmly believed I was selfishly hoarding immense wealth while they struggled to maintain their lifestyle. They believed my money was entirely their money. And if Julian had already illegally used my identity as a guarantor for 20 grand, there was absolutely no telling what else they were actively plotting. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with various fraud departments, placing hard security locks on all my credit reports, and forwarding the collection notice directly to my lawyer to send an aggressive cease and desist letter. I thought I had successfully boarded up the windows before the hurricane hit land. I thought my strong legal protections and my absolute silence would starve them out. But I severely underestimated the terrifying depths of their entitlement. They were not just going to forge my name for online gambling debts. They were preparing to steal my entire financial identity. The pressure in my chest grew significantly heavier. The headaches became blinding and constant. I was fighting a brutal war on 3 fronts: a highly toxic workplace, a rigorous academic schedule, and a family actively trying to destroy my financial future. I was walking directly into the center eye of the storm, and my breaking body was about to violently force me to surrender. The final week before the graduation ceremony was an absolute, terrifying blur of adrenaline, excessive caffeine, and a rapid physical deterioration that I stubbornly and foolishly refused to acknowledge. The massive tech buyout was finally entering its final critical legal phase. On Tuesday morning, I sat perfectly still in the highly polished, mahogany-paneled conference room at Caldwell Financial. The stark contrast in my life was deeply jarring. I was wearing a cheap, fraying, off-the-rack suit that was hanging loosely off my shrinking frame, sitting directly across from Mr. Caldwell himself, a senior wealth manager who routinely handled complex accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Everything is fully locked down and secured, Nathan," Mr. Caldwell said, sliding a thick, heavy stack of heavily redacted legal documents across the large table. He was a sharp, highly perceptive man in his 60s who treated me with significantly more respect in 5 minutes than my own father had in 28 long years. "The primary trust is officially established. We have completely insulated all of your assets from any potential civil lawsuit, debt collection agency, or familial claims regarding a fabricated inheritance or shared accounts. Your father's aggressive attempt to contact our firm inquiring about a family business account was flagged by security and rejected immediately." I paused, my expensive pen hovering anxiously over the final signature line. "My father actually called your firm?" Mr. Caldwell nodded grimly, his expression serious. "Yesterday afternoon. He claimed he was a primary cosigner on your business accounts and demanded full, unredacted balance statements. My security team politely informed him that attempting to access a client's private financial data without authorization is a severe federal offense. He yelled obscenities at my receptionist and violently hung up. You were incredibly wise to set up these strict firewalls, Nathan. Your family is actively hunting for this capital." I signed the documents, pressing the pen down so incredibly hard it nearly tore right through the expensive paper. My father was not just patiently waiting for me to willingly hand over the money. He was actively trying to illegally breach my bank accounts. He was trying to take it by absolute force. When I finally left the towering Caldwell building, I stepped out into the bright, blinding Boston sunlight, and suddenly, the concrete pavement tilted violently beneath my feet. I stumbled forward heavily, catching myself hard against a large concrete planter. A thick drop of dark blood hit the back of my trembling hand. Quickly wiped my nose. It was bleeding, again, the third severe time that week. I walked slowly to the hospital for my afternoon shift, aggressively stuffing tissues up my nose and swallowing a handful of over-the-counter ibuprofen just to keep standing. Clara cornered me right by the supply closet that afternoon. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong and unyielding. "You are completely gray, Nathan. Look at me right now," she demanded, forcefully making me maintain eye contact. I tried to pull away, but my knees literally felt like water. "I am fine, Clara. The graduation is on Saturday. Then I am done. The master's thesis is fully submitted. I can finally sleep for a week straight." "You are in active cardiac distress. You are sweating profusely in a freezing room," Clara argued, her eyes wide with genuine, unmasked fear. "I am going to get a wheelchair and admit you to the ER right now." "No!" I snapped, much harsher than I ever intended. I took a deep, shaky breath and softened my voice. "Please, just let me cross the finish line. I need to walk across that stage. I need to prove that I survived them and their abuse." She let go of my arm very slowly, shaking her head in deep dismay. "You are surviving the battle just to drop dead right after the war is won. Please, be careful." The morning of graduation, the sky was a brilliant, unforgiving, picture-perfect blue. The sprawling university campus was absolutely packed with proud parents holding large balloons, massive bouquets of flowers, and expensive cameras. The morning air buzzed heavily with excitement, relief, and undeniable family pride. I stood nervously in the staging area, wearing my heavy black gown and master's hood. I felt completely and totally detached from my own physical body, like I was watching a distant movie of myself. My heart was maintaining a strange, terrifying rhythm, beating far too fast, then skipping beats entirely. I was sweating completely through my dress shirt despite the cool, refreshing morning breeze rolling in off the harbor. I checked my phone one last, pathetic time. I had sent my parents the VIP front row tickets 3 months ago. I had sent a polite follow-up email, a reminder text, even after the massive betrayal, even after the aggressive fraud attempts. A pathetic, deeply broken part of my inner child still desperately hoped they would show up. I hoped they would sit in the crowd, see me in my regalia, and realize I was actually worth something. I hoped my father would finally see that I was strong for the right reasons. 0 notifications, 0 calls, 0 messages. I looked out at the massive, cheering crowd. The specific seats I had reserved in Section B, Row 4, were glaringly empty. A massive, painful hole in a vast sea of celebrating families. The loud orchestral music finally started. The long line of graduates began to move slowly toward the massive stage set up on the main lawn. I forced my heavy legs to move. One step, then another. The dean's voice boomed through the loudspeakers. "And now, the candidates for the Master of Health Administration." I was exactly 3 people away from the wooden stairs leading up to the stage. I heard the large crowd cheering. I saw the bright flash of cameras capturing perfectly happy moments. Then, a high-pitched, piercing ringing sound started in my ears, completely drowning out the music, the loud applause, and the names being called. The bright blue sky suddenly turned a sickly, washed-out yellow. The solid grass beneath my feet felt like it was turning to liquid. I desperately tried to reach out to the person in front of me, to grab their shoulder for balance, but my arm would not obey my brain. A sudden, crushing, agonizing weight slammed directly into my chest, stealing all the oxygen from my lungs. The world tilted violently sideways. I saw the sky flip upside down. I heard a collective gasp from the large crowd, followed by a woman screaming for a medic. The hard, brutal impact of my skull hitting the ground was the absolute last thing I felt before the darkness swallowed me completely whole. Which brings us right back to the emergency room. Lying in that bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, feeling the cold, absolute reality of my family's abandonment wash over my entire soul. The 75 missed calls. The aggressive texts from my father demanding I fix Julian's massive financial mess. The tagged photo of their happy barbecue while I was literally fighting for my life. I slowly sat up in the hospital bed, completely ignoring the sharp pain in my chest. I looked at my phone. The screen was still glowing brightly with my father's final text. "We need you." Answer: immediately. I did not type a response. I did not shed a single tear. All the fear, the deeply ingrained childhood guilt, and the desperate, pathetic need for their approval simply evaporated in that sterile room. It was replaced by a cold, highly calculated, absolute clarity. They wanted to play vicious games with my life. They wanted to commit financial fraud and demand my compliance while completely ignoring my existence? Fine. I reached over and pressed the red button to call the nurse. I needed my discharge papers immediately. I had a very important phone call to make to Mr. Caldwell, and a devastating trap to spring that would systematically destroy every single thing they held dear. I was about to show my father just how strong I really was. I did not wait for the overworked emergency room nurse to come back into the room. I simply reached over to my left arm, grabbed the edge of the clear medical tape holding the intravenous line in place, and pulled it back in one sharp, aggressive motion. A small bead of dark blood welled up on my skin, but I simply pressed a dry cotton ball against the puncture wound until the bleeding stopped. Dr. Harrison walked back into the room just as I was pulling my wrinkled dress shirt over my shoulders. He immediately tried to block the door, completely horrified that I was signing myself out against strict medical advice just a few hours after suffering a major cardiac event on the graduation lawn. He warned me about the severe risk of a secondary collapse. He warned me about the massive legal liability the hospital would face. He even threatened to call hospital security. But I could not stay in that sterile bed for another second. The pale white walls were closing in on my sanity, and I had a very specific, highly urgent mission to execute. I looked Dr. Harrison dead in the eye and told him I was leaving, with or without his permission. He finally stepped aside, shaking his head in absolute dismay. I walked straight out of the hospital and into the late afternoon Boston air. The sky had turned a bruising, heavy shade of purple, and the busy city streets were filled with people heading home to their normal, functional families. I hailed a yellow cab, completely ignoring the painful, rhythmic throbbing in my chest, and headed straight to my tiny, overpriced apartment. I needed my personal laptop, my physical legal files, and complete, absolute silence to process what I was about to do. The moment I unlocked my front door and stepped into the dark apartment, my phone started vibrating furiously against my leg once again. It was my mother this time, Brenda, the woman who could easily fake a terminal illness just to fund a luxury tropical vacation for her golden child. I did not answer the call. I simply tossed the heavy phone onto the granite kitchen counter and let it buzz itself right off the edge onto the floor while I booted up my laptop. I had an incredibly urgent email sitting at the very top of my inbox from Mr. Caldwell, flagged with high importance and marked confidential. The subject line simply read, "Immediate attention required. Fraudulent activity detected." I clicked it open, my exhausted eyes scanning the heavily encrypted, multi-page document his legal team had attached. It was a scanned, high-resolution copy of a massive commercial loan application from a shady, high-risk lending institution located right back in my hometown in Pennsylvania. The principal loan amount was for $50,000. The stated purpose of the loan was listed as business development and real estate acquisition, but I knew exactly what that money was actually for. Julian had managed to massively escalate his online gambling debt, or perhaps he had crossed the wrong people in the underground betting scene, and he needed a massive financial bailout to stay out of a state jail cell. But the most sickening, truly twisted part of the legal document was located at the very bottom of the second page. There, in bold, unmistakable blue ink, was my personal signature. It was my exact, precise signature, formally listed as the primary financial guarantor for the entire $50,000 amount. But looking closely at the screen, I could tell it was not fresh. The ink weight was completely wrong. The pixels around the curved edges of the signature were slightly distorted, a telltale sign of a low-quality digital scan. I zoomed in on the high-definition screen until the letters blurred into blue blocks. I instantly recognized that specific signature. It was the exact signature I had used 5 years ago on a highly sensitive legal document transferring my half of my grandparents' inheritance over to my parents when they convinced me they desperately needed the money to save our childhood house from foreclosure. They had deliberately kept that old legal document, scanned it in high resolution, and digitally forged my name onto a massive, high-interest loan to save their golden child from his own criminal consequences. They had committed severe, undeniable federal fraud. And because they firmly thought I was just a low-level, easily manipulated hospital administrator who would eventually cave to their relentless emotional terrorism, they assumed they could simply force me to retroactively confirm the massive loan when the bank inevitably called me for voice verification. That was the real reason for the 75 missed calls while I was fighting for my life in the emergency room. The lending institution was holding the funds securely in escrow, flatly refusing to release the $50,000 until the primary guarantor me verbally confirmed the massive financial commitment and authorized the transfer. They needed me to answer the phone and blindly say yes to the bank representative, officially trapping myself under a massive mountain of high-interest debt, completely ruining my pristine credit score, and essentially tying a heavy concrete block around my ankles for the next decade of my life. I picked up my phone from the hardwood floor. I dialed Mr. Caldwell's direct emergency office line. He answered on the very first ring, sounding incredibly tense and highly alert. "Nathan, I assume you saw the encrypted file I sent over," Mr. Caldwell said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute corporate authority. "My fraud prevention department intercepted this credit inquiry exactly an hour ago. The lending institution ran a deep, comprehensive credit check on your social security number, which immediately triggered our internal security firewalls because all of your personal assets are fully locked inside the newly formed corporate trust." "I saw the file, Arthur," I replied, my voice completely stripped of any human emotion. "They digitally lifted my signature from an old college fund document related to my inheritance. They are actively trying to secure $50,000 to bail out my younger brother, and they are using my legal identity to do it without my consent. This is not just a petty family dispute anymore, Nathan," Mr. Caldwell stated firmly, the sound of him typing rapidly echoing in the background. "This is felony identity theft and federal wire fraud, because your assets are currently tied up in the massive tech buyout transfer. This kind of unauthorized credit inquiry could cause massive bureaucratic nightmares for our legal team and delay the final corporate payouts. We need to shut this down immediately. I have my senior corporate lawyer on standby right now. We can easily dispatch the local authorities to their residence tonight and have them all arrested before dinner." I looked out my small apartment window, watching the bright city lights flicker on across the sprawling Boston skyline. A cold, dark, highly calculated smile crept across my face. Dispatching the local police was far too easy. It was far too quick. My parents thrived on constantly playing the victim, and if the police simply showed up at their door, they would spin a massive, complicated web of lies about how it was just a simple family misunderstanding, how I gave them verbal permission over the phone, how they were just confused by the complicated loan paperwork. I needed them to hang themselves with their own arrogant words. I needed them to admit it openly and proudly, thinking they had completely won the battle. "Hold off on calling the police for exactly 20 minutes, Mr. Caldwell," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows heavily on the cold granite kitchen counter. "I want you to conference into a secure call with me right now. I am going to call my father back. I want you and your entire legal team to listen to exactly what they say to me. I want a certified, legally binding audio recording of them explicitly admitting to the forgery before we drop the absolute hammer on their lives." Mr. Caldwell paused, his sharp mind instantly understanding the sheer weight and brilliant strategy of what I was asking. "You are setting a psychological trap. Are you absolutely sure you are medically stable enough for this kind of confrontation, Nathan? I was officially informed about your physical collapse at the graduation ceremony. I have never been stronger in my entire life," I said smoothly, and for the absolute first time in 28 years, it was the undeniable truth. I gave him the verbal signal, and he silently merged his secure line with mine, turning himself into a silent, lethal witness. The trap was perfectly set. The corporate audience was securely in place. I dialed my father's number. He answered on the second ring. He did not say hello. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask why I had mysteriously disappeared on my own graduation day, or why the hospital had tried to call them repeatedly. "Where the hell have you been?" my father roared directly into the receiver, his loud voice echoing with unchecked rage and absolute, blind entitlement. Do you have any idea how much physical stress you are putting your own mother through right now? We have been calling your phone for hours. You are incredibly selfish. I kept my voice extremely small, weak, trembling. I played the exact pathetic role they expected me to play, the subservient, exhausted, easily manipulated son who always folded under pressure. I was in the hospital, Dad. I collapsed right there at the graduation ceremony. My heart gave out on me. Do not give me your pathetic excuses, Nathan, he interrupted harshly, completely dismissing the terrifying fact that I had nearly died on a public lawn. We all have stress in our lives. Julian is in a massive, life-altering crisis right now, and we absolutely do not have time for your usual dramatic pity parties. You need to focus on this family. Did the bank representative call you yet? I let out a long, shaky breath, making absolutely sure I sounded properly terrified and thoroughly confused. The bank? Dad, I saw a massive fraud alert on my credit report when I checked my phone. Someone tried to take out a $50,000 loan in my name. What is going on? My mother violently snatched the phone away from him. I could clearly hear her frantic, manipulative, heavy breathing through the speaker. Nathan, sweetheart, please listen to me, Brenda cooed, instantly utilizing that sickeningly sweet, toxic tone she always used right before she plunged the knife directly into my back. It is not fraud, honey. We just needed a little bit of financial help. Julian made a tiny mistake with some very bad people, and they are threatening to hurt him if he does not pay them back today. We used your name for the loan application because your credit score is so much better than ours right now. We only did it because you are the highly responsible one. You have a great salary. You can handle this kind of intense pressure much better than Julian ever could. You know he is far too sensitive for this kind of stress. I clenched my jaw so incredibly hard my teeth actively ached. You forged my signature, Mom. That is highly illegal. You committed a crime. Oh, stop using such ugly, dramatic words, she scoffed, instantly shifting from sickly sweet to deeply annoyed and combative. It is absolutely not forgery when it is for your own family. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us this favor. My father forcefully grabbed the phone back, his thin patience completely gone. Listen to me very carefully, Nathan. The bank is going to call your phone in exactly 10 minutes to formally verify the signature on the application. You are going to pick up that phone, you are going to confirm all your personal details, and you are going to authorize the immediate release of those funds into my checking account. If you do not do exactly what I say, we will lose the house, Julian will go to state prison, and we will publicly disown you. We will tell everyone in the extended family what a selfish, arrogant, ungrateful son you really are. Do you understand my instructions? I stayed entirely silent for a long, heavy moment. I let the toxic weight of his massive extortion attempt hang thick in the air, ensuring that Mr. Caldwell and the corporate lawyers sitting in their glass office were meticulously capturing every single syllable of this confession. Dad, I whispered into the receiver, perfectly mimicking a broken man who had finally surrendered to the abuse. I do not have that kind of money to pay back. I work an administrative hospital job. I cannot possibly afford the massive monthly payments on a $50,000 loan. It will completely ruin my life and my future. My father let out a harsh, barking, deeply cruel laugh that chilled the very marrow in my bones. It was the undeniable laugh of a ruthless predator who firmly believed he had completely cornered his helpless prey. You do not need to worry about the monthly payments, you complete idiot, my father sneered, his voice oozing with absolute complacency and unchecked arrogance. We know all about your little secret project. Derek told me everything when I saw him at Walmart last week. We know you are secretly sitting on some big tech money, hiding it from your own flesh and blood like a greedy, pathetic coward. You have a fancy lawyer setting up commercial real estate deals while your own brother is suffering in fear? You are absolutely disgusting. So you are going to sign the legal loan documents today, and you are going to use that secret tech money to pay it off entirely by next month. Consider it your back rent for us raising you all these years. They had taken the bait perfectly. Without a shred of hesitation, they had confidently admitted to the forgery, the blatant extortion, and their explicit intent to steal what they falsely believed was a small, manageable tech bonus. They honestly thought they had successfully backed a helpless hospital employee into an inescapable corner. They had absolutely no idea they were aggressively demanding pocket change from a multimillionaire who had just securely locked his entire, massive fortune behind an impenetrable, federally protected fortress of elite corporate law. The psychological trap was completely shut. The evidence was secured. It was finally time to pull the trigger. "So that is it, then," I said, leaning closer to the microphone on my phone. My voice was no longer small. It was no longer weak, and it certainly did not tremble. The fabricated, pathetic tremor I had carefully injected into my tone completely vanished in an instant, instantly replaced by a cold, hard, unyielding steel that my parents had never, ever heard from me before in my entire life. "Excuse me?" My father snapped aggressively, clearly thrown off balance by the sudden, dramatic shift in my cadence. "Do not get an attitude with me over the phone, boy. You will do exactly as you are told, when you are told." "No, Gregory," I said calmly, deliberately using his first name for the absolute first time in my entire existence. I distinctly heard my mother gasp sharply in the background, utterly scandalized by the perceived disrespect. "I will not be doing anything of the sort. I will not be signing a single legal document for you. I will not be answering any verification calls from your predatory lender. And I will certainly not be bailing Julian out of the massive, illegal hole he dug for himself. How dare you speak to your own father that way?" My mother shrieked into the background, completely losing her carefully crafted composure. "We are in a massive family crisis. Julian could be physically hurt by these people. We forged that signature to save this family from ruin, and you are going to honor it like a good son." "Thank you so much for repeating that, Brenda," I said smoothly, leaning back in my comfortable chair and staring out at the beautiful Boston skyline. "I just wanted to make absolutely, unequivocally certain that everyone on this secure line heard you clearly admit to federal fraud, identity theft, and financial extortion." The phone line went completely dead silent for exactly 3 terrifying seconds. The kind of heavy, suffocating, breathless silence that occurs right before a massive, devastating bomb detonates and levels a city block. What do you mean, everyone on this line?" my father stammered. The absolute, blinding arrogance suddenly started bleeding right out of his voice, rapidly replaced by a creeping, icy, undeniable panic. I did not answer him directly. Instead, I simply spoke to the silent witness. "Mr. Caldwell, are you still there?" The deep, commanding, highly professional voice of the senior wealth manager echoed through the conference call, hitting the line like a massive, unstoppable freight train. "I am here, Nathan," Mr. Caldwell stated, his tone dripping with absolute, terrifying corporate authority. "And my entire legal team has successfully recorded every single second of this highly incriminating conversation for our files." "Who the hell is this?" my father demanded, his voice pitching upward in genuine fear. "Nathan, who is on the phone right now? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "This is Arthur Caldwell," he replied smoothly, unbothered by my father's yelling. "Senior Managing Partner and Chief Legal Counsel at Caldwell Financial. I am the primary wealth manager and the executive trustee for Nathan's newly formed corporate holding company. And you, sir, have just made a catastrophic, life-altering mistake." I could practically hear the oxygen violently leaving the room back in their Pennsylvania house. My parents were completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of the introduction. "You see, Gregory," I took over, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying calm that I never knew I possessed. "Derek did not tell you the whole truth because Derek is a massive idiot who did not know the whole truth. He simply told you I made a little bit of tech money on the side. He told you I had a lawyer. He deliberately made you think I was just a lucky, overworked hospital administrator hiding a small salary bonus. He made you firmly believe you could easily bully me into paying Julian's pathetic gambling debts just by raising your voice. I paused for effect, actively letting the absolute terror sink deep into their bones before I delivered the final, devastating blow to their entire reality. I did not just get a bonus, I stated clearly, pronouncing every word with surgical precision. I built a highly revolutionary triage software system that was just purchased entirely by a massive global healthcare conglomerate. The buyout was officially finalized and signed this morning while I was in the hospital. I am not a hospital administrator anymore. I am the primary founder of a multimillion-dollar tech startup. And the massive assets you are actively trying to illegally steal from me are currently sitting inside a highly secured, federally protected corporate trust managed exclusively by Mr. Caldwell. My mother let out a small, pathetic, high-pitched whimper. It was the distinct sound of her entire manipulated worldview violently crashing down around her. Now, Mr. Caldwell interjected, seamlessly taking absolute control of the legal execution. Because Nathan is a highly valued VIP client of our financial firm, we take any threats to his financial security incredibly seriously. When you aggressively submitted that fraudulent loan application using his forged signature, you did not just commit a petty crime against your son. You committed severe federal wire fraud across state lines, attempting to illegally leverage massive assets that are fully protected by our institution. Wait, please hold on a second. My father pleaded, his false bravado completely shattered into dust. He sounded exactly like a terrified, cornered animal begging for its life. It was just a simple misunderstanding. We did not know he had that kind of corporate setup. We are his family, we can work this out internally. We do not need corporate lawyers or the police involved in family business. It is far too late for that, I said, my voice completely and utterly devoid of any human sympathy. For 28 miserable years, you treated me like an absolute garbage disposal for this family. You relentlessly made me clean up Julian's messes. You drained my entire college fund. You blatantly lied about a fake medical emergency to steal my hard-earned money for a luxury tropical vacation. And today, while I was literally collapsing from severe cardiac strain at my own graduation ceremony, you were throwing a backyard barbecue and openly mocking me on the internet. You thought I was incredibly weak because I always stayed quiet and took the abuse. You tragically mistook my silence for submission. Nathan, baby, please listen to your mother. Brenda sobbed loudly into the receiver, genuinely crying for the very first time in her entirely manipulative life. We love you so much. We were just so terrified for your brother. You have all that amazing money now. You are so incredibly successful. You can fix this easily with the snap of your fingers. Please do not do this to us. We are a family. We are absolutely not a family, Brenda, I replied coldly, feeling nothing but disgust. You are just a group of greedy parasites who finally pushed too hard and killed the host. And now, you are going to completely starve. Mr. Caldwell, I said, formalizing the final lethal command. Please inform them of the exact next steps your office will be taking. Gladly, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice completely clinical. As of 10 minutes ago, my corporate legal department has officially contacted the Federal Fraud Division. We have formally submitted the forged loan documents, along with the certified audio recording of this phone call, directly to the authorities. Furthermore, because you explicitly attempted to use Nathan's legal identity to secure a massive loan, we have officially flagged all of your personal banking accounts for highly suspicious fraudulent activity. Your local bank will be freezing your checking, savings, and retirement accounts within the hour pending a full, exhaustive federal investigation. You are freezing our money? My father screamed, pure, unadulterated terror violently ripping from his throat. You absolutely cannot do that. We have a massive mortgage. We have expensive car payments. Julian needs a criminal defense lawyer right now. Julian is going to need a lot more than a cheap defense lawyer, I said quietly. And so are you. Do not ever call this number again. Do not ever attempt to contact me, my firm, or absolutely anyone associated with me. If you ever show up in Boston, I will have you immediately arrested for harassment and stalking. Nathan, you cannot do this to your own blood. My father roared, desperately and futilely trying to regain control of a situation that was already over. I am your father. I gave you absolutely everything. You owe me your life. If you hang up this phone right now, you are completely dead to me. I smiled. A real, genuine, bone-deep smile. The heavy, suffocating, rusty chains that had bound me to their toxicity for 28 years completely snapped in half, falling away into the darkness forever. I was already dead to you, Gregory, I whispered softly. Enjoy the absolute hell you actively created for yourselves. I hit the red button. The call instantly ended. The silence that filled my apartment was no longer lonely or oppressive. It was the beautiful, pristine, incredible sound of absolute, untouchable freedom. The immediate, explosive aftermath of that single phone call was nothing short of an absolute, catastrophic implosion for my entire family tree. When you arrogantly build your entire life on a fragile, rotting foundation of lies, manipulation, and the blatant exploitation of others, it truly only takes one single missing brick for the entire sprawling mansion to violently crash to the ground. I did not have to lift another finger to destroy them. I simply sat back in my quiet Boston apartment, focused intensely on my cardiac recovery regimen, and watched the massive legal machinery I had activated completely and utterly dismantle their perfect, arrogant lives piece by agonizing piece. Exactly 2 hours after I hung up the phone, the local authorities in Pennsylvania arrived in force at my parents' manicured suburban home. Because Mr. Caldwell's prestigious firm carried immense corporate weight and political influence, the Federal Fraud Division did not take the forged $50,000 loan application lightly. They did not just send a patrol car. They arrived with a team of detectives and a signed judge's warrant. Through the incredibly fast, highly vicious grapevine of our nosy hometown neighbors, I learned exactly what went down that evening. The police knocked heavily on the front door right in the middle of their tense family dinner. Julian, who was currently hiding out in the dark basement from the shady creditors he owed money to, completely panicked at the sight of the flashing lights. He foolishly tried to run out the back patio door, hopped the neighbor's wooden fence, and was immediately tackled to the ground by 2 aggressive officers right in the middle of Mrs. Gable's prized, thorny rose bushes. He was arrested on the spot, publicly handcuffed in the dirt, for outstanding warrants related to illegal gambling, massive wire fraud, and fleeing the scene of an active investigation. My parents' bank accounts were aggressively frozen the very next morning at exactly 9 a.m. They desperately went to the local grocery store to buy food, completely in denial about the severity of Caldwell's threat, and their debit cards were publicly declined at the crowded register. The massive, crushing humiliation they had always tried to avoid was now playing out in vivid, agonizing color in front of the entire town. They had to abandon their groceries and walk out with absolutely nothing. The desperate, unhinged voicemails started pouring into my blocked folder by the dozens. I absolutely did not answer them, but my corporate lawyer meticulously transcribed every single one of them for my official legal records. My mother called sobbing hysterically, aggressively begging me to call the police off, insanely claiming she would literally scrub my apartment floors on her hands and knees if I just gave them the money to bail Julian out of county jail. When that pathetic tactic did not work, Aunt Martha called. The awful woman who had proudly cheered for them in Cabo San Lucas was now screaming at the top of her lungs into my voicemail, calling me a vicious monster, a traitor, and a ruthless sociopath for destroying my own flesh and blood. Then, exactly an hour later, Aunt Martha called back, completely changing her tune, desperately begging me for a small personal loan because my parents had apparently borrowed thousands of dollars from her, and she could no longer get it back due to the frozen accounts. I completely ignored every single one of them. I changed my personal phone number. I completely erased my digital footprint. I effectively became a ghost to everyone in the state of Pennsylvania. Without my constant, reliable influx of cash to serve as a buffer for their terrible financial decisions, my parents were finally forced to turn on each other. The immense, crushing stress of the federal investigation, combined with the absolute lack of accessible funds, completely shattered their toxic marriage. My father viciously blamed my mother for coddling Julian his entire life and creating a criminal monster. My mother relentlessly blamed my father for being a terrible provider and driving away the only son who actually made money. The screaming matches were so loud the police were called for noise complaints twice in 1 week. Within 3 agonizing months, their beautiful suburban house went into aggressive foreclosure. They absolutely could not pay the massive mortgage without my monthly contributions. And with their accounts completely locked down in the active fraud investigation, the bank moved incredibly fast to seize the asset. The beautiful wraparound porch and the perfectly edged lawn where I was forced to pick up Julian's garbage on my birthday were publicly auctioned off to the highest bidder on the courthouse steps. My father was forced to move into a cheap, depressing, roach-infested apartment complex across town, absolutely drowning in massive legal fees as he tried to desperately defend himself against the federal forgery and extortion charges. My mother had absolutely nowhere else to go, so she had to move into Aunt Martha's cramped, incredibly dusty spare bedroom, where the 2 toxic sisters spent their miserable days bitterly arguing with each other and loudly blaming the entire world for their self-inflicted misery. And Julian, the precious golden child, was finally forced to face the absolute, terrifying reality of his own reckless actions without a financial safety net to catch his fall. Because my parents had absolutely no money to hire a high-priced criminal defense attorney, Julian was assigned an overworked, completely exhausted public defender. He took a harsh, unforgiving plea deal for the gambling fraud and identity theft charges to avoid a lengthy trial he would undoubtedly lose. He was formally sentenced to 2 years in a state facility, followed by 5 intense years of strict probation. They had lost absolutely everything they held dear: their pristine home, their beloved golden child, their carefully crafted public image, and their toxic marriage. They had traded it all for a desperate, incredibly greedy attempt to steal from the one person who had actually tried to love them. As for me, I finally stopped merely surviving the daily trauma, and I started actually living a beautiful life. 2 entire years passed in the blink of an eye. A lot can drastically change in 24 months when you are no longer carrying the massive, suffocating, crushing weight of 3 fully grown adults on your exhausted back. My physical recovery did not happen overnight like some convenient cinematic miracle. It took months of dedicated, painful physical therapy, strict dietary changes to protect my heart, and intense, weekly psychological counseling to completely unlearn the deeply ingrained people-pleaser trauma my parents had installed in my brain since childhood. I had to painfully learn how to firmly say the word no without my heart racing in absolute irrational panic. I had to learn that my personal worth as a human being was absolutely not directly tied to my financial utility to others. I formally resigned from the hospital, proudly walking past Dr. Victor's cluttered desk on my very last day without saying a single solitary word to him. The look of absolute shock on his arrogant face when he realized I was walking away from his empty promises was entirely priceless. I officially launched my own independent healthcare technology consulting firm, utilizing the immense capital from the Caldwell buyout to build a cutting-edge team. The business absolutely exploded in its first year. I moved out of that depressing, freezing, cramped studio apartment and purchased a beautiful, sprawling, sun-drenched penthouse in the heart of downtown Boston. And to properly celebrate my complete, undeniable freedom, I walked directly into a high-end luxury dealership and purchased a brand-new, midnight black Porsche 911 Carrera in cash. It was completely unnecessary, incredibly flashy, and absolutely perfect in every single way. Every single time I gripped the smooth leather steering wheel of that Porsche and listened to the massive engine roar to life, it was a tangible, undeniable physical reminder that I was finally in the driver's seat of my own life. Clara, the incredibly tough, perceptive triage nurse who had desperately tried to save me from myself back at the hospital, quit her highly stressful job and happily became the chief operations officer of my new consulting firm. She had survived her own brutal divorce and nasty custody battles, and she understood exactly what it meant to rebuild a beautiful life from the absolute ashes. She became the loyal sister I never had, my most trusted and brilliant business partner, and the absolute core of my chosen, genuine family. I truly thought I had completely closed the thick book on my painful past. But the universe always has a funny, twisted way of delivering one final test to see if you have truly learned your lesson. One quiet afternoon, I was sitting comfortably in my massive corner office, looking over some highly lucrative commercial real estate contracts, when my receptionist walked in and handed me a thick, handwritten envelope. It had been aggressively forwarded through my corporate lawyers to ensure my safety. The messy return address was Aunt Martha's small house back in Pennsylvania. I stared at the wrinkled envelope for a long time. The old Nathan would have eagerly opened it with trembling hands, absolutely terrified of what new family crisis was lurking inside. The new Nathan calmly slid a heavy silver letter opener under the flap and pulled out a long, rambling, tear-stained letter written on cheap notebook paper. It was the final, sickening twist in a deeply twisted family saga. Aunt Martha had written to me in a state of absolute, pathetic desperation. In the lengthy letter, she finally confessed the ultimate, hidden truth about the forged loan that had brought down the entire family empire. My parents had not actually come up with the brilliant idea to forge my signature on that loan document. They were far too incompetent and cowardly for that level of direct financial crime. It was Aunt Martha and Julian all along. According to her frantic, desperate confession, Julian owed a massive gambling debt directly to Aunt Martha's new husband, a shady, aggressive contractor who was actively threatening to break Julian's legs if he didn't pay up. Aunt Martha, absolutely desperate to get her husband's money back, had masterminded the entire fraudulent loan application. She had personally provided Julian with the scanned copy of my old college fund signature that she found in my parents' filing cabinet, and she had instructed him exactly how to digitally apply it to the $50,000 commercial loan. My parents had simply acted as the aggressive attack dogs, entirely manipulated by Martha and Julian to bully me over the phone into confirming the loan with the bank, falsely thinking they were just protecting the family from violent loan sharks. My parents were completely guilty of extortion and enabling, but they were also incredibly stupid pawns in a much darker, highly illegal game played by their own sister and beloved son. Now, with Julian rotting in state prison and my parents entirely bankrupt and divorced, Aunt Martha's aggressive husband had left her, taking absolutely what little money she had left in her accounts. She was writing to me, pitifully begging for forgiveness, begging for financial help, pleading that she had only done it out of sheer desperation to save her own marriage. I read the entire letter carefully. I completely absorbed the massive betrayal, the incredibly intricate layers of manipulation, and the sheer, unadulterated toxicity of the bloodline I had miraculously managed to escape. I did not feel anger. I did not feel a sudden urge to exact further revenge or call the police on her. I simply felt absolutely nothing. I calmly folded the letter in half, tore it straight down the middle, and tossed the pieces directly into the sleek metal trash can under my desk. I did not write back. I did not call my lawyers. I simply let the absolute, deafening silence be my final, permanent answer to their existence. They were completely dead to me, and ghosts absolutely do not get replies. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window of my office and looked out over the sprawling, beautiful city of Boston. The sun was slowly setting, casting a brilliant, fiery orange glow over the harbor and the buildings below. My father used to aggressively tell me that I had to be strong. He used to say that real men do not complain, that they quietly absorb the pain to protect the family infrastructure at all costs. He constantly used that word, strong, as a heavy weapon to keep me in line, to turn me into a beast of burden for their endless, selfish mistakes. But as I stood there, looking at the incredible, peaceful life I had built with my own two hands, I finally understood the true definition of the word. True strength is not quietly absorbing the relentless abuse of toxic people just because you happen to share the exact same DNA. Strength is not setting yourself completely on fire just to keep manipulative, incredibly greedy people perfectly warm. Strength is having the absolute, undeniable courage to look the people who are actively using you dead in the eye, and finally saying no. Strength is realizing that your own life, your own physical health, and your own genuine happiness are actually worth fiercely fighting for. Strength is confidently walking away from the burning building, absolutely refusing to look back, and having the sheer willpower to rebuild a beautiful, completely new life from the absolute ground up. If you are listening to this right now, and you are currently drowning under the immense, suffocating weight of a deeply toxic family, please hear me right now. You absolutely do not owe them your future. You do not owe them your hard-earned sanity. Choosing to radically protect yourself is not selfish. It is the most vital, necessary act of survival you will ever execute in your entire life. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand and walk away from the people who were supposed to unconditionally love you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Choose yourself.